Hey everybody, Doomwake here, and welcome back to another discussion video on the channel. I know you guys really like talking about stuff. You like talking about ban lists, you like talking about top 10s. Let's put them together. Before we continue, I just wanted to say be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what your top 10 is down below. And if there's any top 10s or any discussion style content you would like to see, please be sure to let me know because all of this is from you guys' feedback. With all of that said, what we are going to be doing today is taking a look at the Pioneer Banlist. We just had a change, and I think now is a better time than ever to revisit and not necessarily take a look at which cards could come off, but maybe take a look at which cards can never come off. We're going to be taking a look at the top 10 cards on the ban list. This is just kind of my personal ranking. There's no sort of distinction between play patterns and is the card fun to play against and so on and so forth, healthy metagames, whatever. It's just what I perceive to be the 10 most powerful cards on the list. And most likely, none of these probably never coming off, but maybe some exceptions. But let us get started with number 10. So coming in at number 10, we have Lurus of the Dream Den. For those of you who have been playing Magic at all since the Companion era was introduced to Magic in general, you probably have an idea of what Companions are. But if you started somewhat recently, you may have never seen Lurus before because it was banned in a lot of formats pretty quickly. It's a 3/2 lifelink, and it lets you cast permanent spells with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard once per turn. Now, why was this card banned from Pioneer? I think this was just really them doing a lot of cleanup duty. At the time when it was in Pioneer, they was seeing a little bit of play. There was some Rakdos Lurus decks with Dreadhorde Arcanist. You could build your mono-white deck in a different way, maybe some Boros decks. There was black-white auras. You could play Rakdos Sacrifice without Mayhem Devil, but that was an interesting deck-building decision. Do you forego the power of Mayhem Devil to have a Lurus? Most of the time, the answer was yes. And I don't think it was necessarily oppressive or dominant in Pioneer in really any way, shape, or form. Part of the reason I think this card was banned when it was just because they were doing cleanup duty. It was getting banned in every other format. It even got banned in Vintage, which Vintage, just to give you a little bit of a history lesson, they really don't ever ban things based on power level, and Lurus was one of the only few cards to ever have accomplished that feat. So realistically, maybe they could bring back Lurus. There's also so many 3-drops that people play nowadays between Fable the Mirror Breaker and Graveyard Trespasser and Shieldred and all of these things combined. I was kind of struggling a little bit with between 9 and 10, but yeah, I don't know. I think Lurus maybe could come back. Am I crazy? I mean, I know I'm crazy, but Lurus, maybe? Coming in at number 9, we have Leyline of Abundance. So, this has the Leyline mechanic, which means that if you start with it in your opening hand, you can begin with it on the battlefield, and it lets all of your green creatures tap for an additional green mana. So, why was this one banned? Well, at the time, this was earlier on in Pioneer's lifespan. They had a more aggressive ban philosophy. They were doing bans not necessarily every week, but sometimes bi-weekly, most likely around monthly. And they were just trying to get a feel for how they wanted the format to look. And one of the very early dominant decks was Mono Green Devotion. There was some starts involving Leyline of Abundance that were just completely absurd. You started with Leyline, you played a land and a Llanowar Elf on your first turn. Now, when you play your second land, you already have 4 mana on turn 2. That's without a Nykthos or anything else. That's just Leyline plus Elf. Heaven forbid you had multiple Elves in those draws, or maybe you also had a Leyline. It provided 2 Devotion for Nykthos. So there was a lot of stuff going on. Could this be unbanned? I really don't think so. Mono Green Devotion is one of the better decks in the format right now with the introduction of Leyline of the Guild Pact, which, for its credit, is very powerful at providing 4 Devotion for Nykthos, but it doesn't give you that extra boost of mana in the draws you don't have Nykthos like Abundance does. So I think for now, probably can leave that one on the list. Coming in at number 8, we have Fadar Guardian. This was another card that was banned relatively early on in Pioneer's lifespan, very early on. And what is Fadar Guardian, you ask? It's pretty simple. It's a 1/4 for 3 and a white cat creature, and when it enters the battlefield, you blink something. Now, why is that good, you ask? Well, there is an infinite combo with Saheeli Ray, where Saheeli makes a copy of the Felidar blinks the Saheeli makes a copy of the Felidar blinks the Saheeli makes a copy of the Felidar blinks the Saheeli, rinse, repeat, and then your opponent takes lethal damage. Now, they don't like combos. We'll talk about that a little bit later on the ban list, but there was a period of time where, and this was even after they banned Fadar Guardian, but there was one huge ban list where they banned like 4 or 5 different combo decks, and I feel like in general, they maybe want Pioneer to be more of a format where you're playing in the battlefield. Turns out, people don't really want to do that anyways. I think that this combo is probably a little too good for Pioneer because it sort of has the same effect as Splinter Twin on Modern, where it just makes you respect it. Once your opponent hits their 3rd turn, you are never allowed to tap out for the rest of the game. And that sort of play pattern where you just have to hold up mana, especially because the removal in Pioneer, not nearly as good as it is in Modern, right? Modern, you have free spells like Solitude, Force Negation, Subtlety, all those, and just the removal is better, right? Path to Exile, Galvanic Discharge, Unholy Heat, etc., etc. Pioneer really only has Fatal Push as a sort of 1-mana way to kill this. I guess Lightning Axe too. But yeah, I just think it puts too much pressure on the format, similar to a card like Winota, and is likely just better off staying on the ban list. At number 7, we have Karn the Great Creator. So this is a somewhat recent addition to the ban list. This was actually, as of the time of recording this, less than a year ago. And similar to Leyline of Abundance, Mono Green gets a little bit too strong, and they got to axe something from it. Now, to be fair, the Karn ban was kind of a long time coming. And it's weird to me because the Karn ban in Pioneer kind of feels pretty similar to the Grief ban in Modern, where they probably could have done this 6 months prior to the actual time of the banning, and that would have been a better time to do it. And at the time they banned Karn, Green had kind of fallen off a little bit. Now, again, I will shed no tears for Karn being banned. I think part of what makes Karn so busted in these green decks is it's not only, it just does everything. It's a combo enabler because it goes and finds Pestilent Cauldron. It is a threat because it goes and finds Sky Sovereign, Cityscape Leveler, etc. And it's a hate piece. You could not play the deck Abzan Greasefang as long as Karn was in the format, because if the green player was in the play and they just played Karn on turn 3, your deck didn't function. There was, in Soul Artifact, was a deck that Karn really put a hampering on, so there was a bunch of different strategies that you just were not allowed to play because Karn was in the format, and it just did so much every time it came into play that, while also being this part of this infinite convoluted combo, pretty happy to see Karn gone. Again, not shedding any tears. And coming in at number 6, we have Underworld Breach. Now, why was this banned again? I'm going to need you guys to let me know in the comments section, because I am staring at the article right now, and reading through this, there really isn't a ton of information here. Now, I was playing Pioneer at the time, so I know it was part of the Lotus Field combo deck that people would like wish for it, or you could play it, and with Tome Scour and all this stuff. But just to give you an idea, I'm just going to pull some excerpts from the article. They said there was some stuff about the other bans, but they said, next, even though Thassa's Oracle has often been a win condition of choice for Underworld Breach decks, once the deck's core combo engine is running, it can win in many ways. Some recent versions of the Underworld Breach deck even forego Thassa's Oracle entirely. The cards we've chosen are the set that gives the most confidence in creating a significant shift in the metagame. They really didn't specifically talk about the card Breach itself. I'm reading through this article, and this was what I referenced earlier about them banning a whole bunch of combo cards. That's neither here nor there. As far as why the card was banned, mostly it was because of Lotus Field. Now, the way the Lotus Field decks used to look like was they were Underworld Breach decks, obviously, before it got banned, and they would utilize Underworld Breach with Wish for Tome Scour, loop themselves, and then eventually flash back that Wish to go get Thassa's Oracle. To the best of my knowledge, and I wasn't playing as much Pioneer during this time, I was playing a little bit, but I don't recall anything outside of that really utilizing Breach. Let me know in the comments, maybe there was some Breach, Tome Scour, Thassa's Oracle main decks that didn't have Lotus Field or Wish, but anyways, you might be asking yourself, well, if the card didn't seem that good, why is it number 6 on the list? It is kind of a broken card, right? Underworld Breach, banned in Legacy for good reason, and banned in Pioneer as well. Very powerful in Modern, just one of the more broken cards. And realistically, even if it didn't do so much in Pioneer before it got banned, It didn't have that much time, and I'm sure people would find a way to abuse it now. So yeah, Breach, extremely broken, especially when combined with stuff like Tome Scour, and number 6 on the list. Number 5, we have Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. Now, if you've played any Modern recently, you're probably familiar with a card called Flage. Now, there's been this discussion about what's better between Flage and Uro. I've seen people go either way. The answer is they're both extremely busted. And Uro, while not as powerful as it was in Modern during its stint in Pioneer, because there's no fetch lands, Delirium or escaping is a little bit harder to achieve, you can find ways to do it. These decks sometimes played Grizzly Salvage. This was before Walking Ballista got banned, so you had a 0-mana way to both get Delirium and a cheaper way to put a card into the graveyard. There's a bunch of ways to do it. And the problem with Uro is that it just sort of subsidizes all of the mid-range games. They all just become fights around Uro. Either both players have it, or one player is casting Uro, the other player is trying to kill the Uro, and so on and so forth. The games just feel very similar. On top of the fact that it's just an extremely broken Magic card. 3 mana for a 6/6, 4 mana for a 6/6, gain a little bit of life. Even if they kill it, you get the card out of it. You're stabilizing against the aggressive decks because it's gaining you life while drawing you cards and helping you hit your land drops to then get to the flashback, and just everything combined about Uro. Completely messed up card. I don't think I need to say more about Uro. Probably should remain on the ban list until the end of time. And that's going to be a common occurrence with the rest of our top 4. Coming in at number 4, we have Field of the Dead. Now, Field of the Dead, similar to Uro, it kind of makes the mid-range and later games all kind of feel the same, right? All of these big mana mid-range decks that just have the same endgame, Uro and Field of the Dead, these kind of go hand in hand together. But specifically, Field of the Dead is extremely hard to attack. More recently, in sets within the past 5 or 6 years, but you could even go all the way back to when Pioneer started, they haven't really been printing good land hate or land destruction. You look at a card, you look at Modern's format, right? The best land destruction is Blood Moon, which is not legal in Pioneer. Stuff like Break the Ice, Harbinger of the Seas, Magus of the Moon, none of these cards you'll find anywhere close to the Pioneer format. And that's why we can't have Field of the Dead, because there's really no good answer to it. There's some, like Crumble to Dust, costs 4 mana, Alpine Moon. There's some extremely mediocre answers. But why was Field of the Dead banned initially? Well, there were decks that were playing Hour of Promise, and I think they had Scapeshift too. And basically what they would do is they would just cast Hour of Promise or Scapeshift, put 10 zombies into play, force you to have a Wrath, which, to be fair, you didn't really want to play Wrath against your opponent's soul type control / mid-range deck, because not really good against the rest of their deck, but you needed to have those Wraths in the deck for Field of the Dead, and it just created this weird play pattern. Even if you Wrath them, they would still just untap and play a land or two and make 4 to 6 more zombies, and you could not beat Field of the Dead decks unless you were comboing them once they got to that stage. And I think that's part of the reason why it was banned. And again, it's just very hard to attack lands in Pioneer, so Field of the Dead, not going to miss you. And we are now on to our top 3, starting with number 3, another recent addition to the ban list. And to my knowledge, I believe the single fastest card to ever get banned. Fact check me in the comments, but Geological Appraiser is number 3 on the list. So basically, this kind of reminds me of the Tibalt Valky Cascade era of Modern, where it only lasted for about 2 weeks and a lot of people don't even necessarily remember it. And if you've gotten into Pioneer somewhat recently, you may not have played during Geological Appraiser. The deck was extremely broken, like one of the most degenerate things you could ever do in Pioneer's history. And it was the 1-card combo that you could just win the game on turn 3. You cycled a Magma Opus or an Elemental Mastery on turn 2, make a treasure, you have 4 mana on turn 3, you cast your Appraiser, and your opponent dies. That's it. 1-card combo, turn 3 win. Yeah, that's why Appraiser was banned. Basically, the TLDR is you would hit a clone, the clone would get Appraiser, that would hit another clone, the clone would get Appraiser, clone, eventually get to find a card that gives all of your stuff haste, and then attack your opponent with a bunch of 3/2s. So yeah, Appraiser, extremely broken. Yeah, can't have Appraiser, definitely glad it's gone. Number 2. So this Number two and number one, I was trying to think if maybe this is going to be hotly debated between number one and number two. So let me know your stance in the comments below. But coming in at number two, I have Once Upon a Time. So Once Upon a Time is not a magic card. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's not really a magic card. It's a Yu-Gi-Oh card. For 0 mana, if it's in your opening hand, you look at the top 5, you get to find any card you want, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library. And even honestly, for 2 mana, if it's not in your opening hand, maybe you have like a turn 1 mana dork, and then you draw it on turn 2, it's still not even that bad to cast for 2 mana. But obviously, the brokenness comes from casting it for free. It just makes the job of you finding that card so much easier. Like if it's finding a combo piece, maybe like a Fadar Guardian or something like that, or in the Mono Green Devotion decks, if it's finding you your Llanowar Elves. There's so many things and so many combos and busted starts that it enables that, yes, very happy that it is on the list. If you look at a deck like Greasefang, right? Greasefang just having a free 0 mana way to essentially give you 5 more looks at finding a Greasefang. Like, do we want that? The things that it enables are just some of the most powerful things that already exist in the format. We don't need to make those decks better. So very happy it is on this list. And if you have made it all the way through the list, you can probably guess what I put as number one. Let's put the abs on the screen. It's the abs man himself, Oko Thief of Crowns. I don't really think, at least in my estimation, I don't think there's really a debate between 1 and 2. I'm sure that people in the comments are going to give me an argument for Once Upon a Time, but Oko Thief of Crowns, it broke Magic, right? And when it was released in Throne of Eldraine, hell of a set, by the way. When the card was released, it completely broke every single format it was in. Legacy, Modern, Pioneer. I mean, people even play it in Vintage. It's still really good in Vintage. Standard was I think there was the Pro Tour that was 75% Oko or something ridiculous like that. It just broke the game. And I'm glad that it's banned in essentially every format, because if you have never had the pleasure of playing against an Oko, I commend you, because that was not a fun experience. Basically, they would just cast the Oko on turn 2 with a mana elf, and then every single creature you played for the rest of the game was just rendered completely irrelevant. Right? It just made every single game feel so much the same, because all you were doing was just trading off 3/3s, and it was just like, can I put more stuff onto the battlefield so I can have more 3/3s than my opponent does? And as you can imagine, those games, not very fun. So yeah, Oko Thief of Crowns, you got some nice abs, but unfortunately, your abs are resigning you to the ban list for all of eternity. So that was the top 10 banned cards in Pioneer. I'm sure that you guys are going to have some words for me. So let me know in the comments section down below how poorly I did. What is your top 10? And until next time, don't play these cards in Pioneer, because you'll be in trouble. Bye-bye.